In front of this struggling little girl who was facing death with bravery and grace, I felt helpless. Frank Fournier, a French photographer who remained by the dying girl's side until she passed away, filmed the little girl's terrifying experience in real time, recalling the tragedy. Join me as we dive into the story of Omayra Sanchez and unfold what occurred. But before we dig down deep, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and make sure you hit the notification bell and get updated whenever a new video is published. A massive mudslide caused by a devastating eruption of a neighbouring volcano swamped the tiny Colombian community of Omayra in November 1985. Omayra Sanchez, 13 years old, was trapped in a massive receptacle of debris and neck-deep water. Rescue operations were unsuccessful as the Colombian child perished, following 3 days' help up to her waist in mud. The tragedy of Omayra. Since about the 1840s, the Nevado del Ruiz volcano in Colombia had already shown indications of action at 5,334 metres above the water. The aftershocks had grown significantly strong by September 1985, which alarmed the community, especially inhabitants of surrounding communities along with Omayra, a town of 31,000 people around 48 kilometres east of the volcano's core. The eruption wasn't wholly unexpected, as the Colombian public stance to earlier danger signs had already been questioned. Seismic activity and steam eruptions throughout the volcano's vicinity had predicted an explosion for up to 2 months. The Nevado del Ruiz exploded on November 13, 1985. That was just a minor blast, destroying around 5 to 10% of both the ice caps which surrounded the arena's crater. But that was enough to cause a massive lahar, or mudslide. The mudslide hit Omayra at a pace of around 25 miles an hour and engulfed 85% of the city in dense, hard sludge. The city roads and highways, buildings and bridges became swallowed by mud flows up to a mile high, destroying the city's major roadways, residences and crossings. People attempted to evacuate but were also stranded by the flood, with too many unable to escape the overwhelming force of the mud that engulfed their entire town. Although several people were fortunate enough to escape with just minor injuries, most of the town's residents died. Up to 25,000 people were killed. Omayra's population was estimated to be a quarter of its original size. Given the considerable destruction, it really would take several hours for the first rescue attempts to begin. As a result, several people, including Omayra Sanchez, died slowly and painfully in the mud. Omayra Sanchez. Omayra was born in August 1972 in the Colombian town of Omayra, in the Tolima department. She's the daughter of a grain picker, Alvaro Enrique, and Maria Alida, a nurse, and she lives with her brother Alvaro and Aunt Maria. Nothing is documented about her life before the eruption of Nevado del Ruiz on November 13, 1985, which resulted in the Omayra tragedy. The failure of Omayra Sanchez. Omayra Sanchez communicates among the reporters, although almost drowning in mud and water throughout this 1985 Spanish-language news program. Frank Fournier, a photojournalist, landed in Bogota 2 days after the eruption. He arrived in Omayra after a 5-hour-long drive as well as a 2.5-hour walk, where he intended to document the rescue efforts in the field. However, when he arrived, the situation was even worse than he had expected. Fournier faced confusion and frustration rather than a coordinated, dynamic effort to save most of the other buried people underneath the debris. Numerous people remained stuck everywhere throughout them. Rescuers were having a hard time getting near them. 2 decades after the horrifying tragedy, he told the BBC that he would still hear people begging for help, and then silence, an eerie silence. It was also really haunting, he said. During the confusion, a farmer led him to a young girl who required support. The girl had already been stuck there for 3 days underneath her collapsed home, and as per the farmer, Omayra Sanchez was her name. In October, the output informing of the hazards and dust generated by eruptions was circulated to endangered groups, namely Omayra. Even though the maps were released in Colombian publications, many victims said that they'd not seen them. The Colombian Congress suspected researchers who were informed were worried about an outbreak of fear-mongering. In contrast, the army was distracted with countering an insurgent operation of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia and their many other allies. Red Cross members and local people struggled to pull her free. Something under the surface had entangled her feet, rendering her immobile. Besides that, the stream flow was enveloping Sanchez steadily, owing in part to the persistent rains. Sanchez had been affected by weather conditions for a very long time by the moment Fournier arrived, as she started to slide in and out of consciousness. In the dire circumstances, Sanchez maintained an optimistic attitude. She started singing a tune, soliciting sweets from the crowd, drank soda, and conducted an interview. "I'm about to be absent for a while because I've not been to the class in 2 days," she said to the Time-Po reporter Germaine Santamaria, who was already present. Sanchez requested that Fournier drive her to school because she was concerned about being late. The photographer sensed the teenager's determination decreasing, as though she was willing to embrace her fate. She requested that volunteers allow her to relax, and then she said her goodbyes to her mum. Omayra Sanchez died 3 hours before Fournier discovered her. Sanchez passed away at 9:45 a.m. She plummeted backwards into the freezing water, an arm stretched outward. With her nose, mouth and eyes swollen red, her face started to swell, and her hands whitened as she neared the end of her life. A blue and white checkered tablecloth was draped around her and her aunt. While in an interview with Caracol Radio, her mum, a nurse identified as Maria Alida, learned of her daughter's death. She sobbed quietly as radio hosts urged the listeners to support her in a minute of silence to honour the 13-year-old's tragic demise. Alida, like her daughter, displayed courage and determination in the aftermath of her loss. "It was terrible, but we have to worry more about casualties," Alida stated, talking to herself because her 12-year-old son, Alvaro Enrique, lost fingers throughout the tragedy. They became their family's sole survivors. They felt helpless there in front of the young girl who had been facing death with bravery and courage when Fournier took the photos. The first and only thing I could think was that he could do a documentary correctly, and the expectation that doing so will inspire services to help those who have been helped and saved. Fournier achieved what he wanted. Several days ago, his illustration of Omayra Sanchez, black-eyed, soaked and fighting for life, was featured in the Paris Match publication. The chilling portrait gained him the 1986 World Press Photo of the Year award and widespread condemnation. The aftermath. Society was perplexed by Omayra Sanchez's well-documented downfall. But how can a photojournalist stand by and witness the death of a 13-year-old girl? Fournier's famous image of Sanchez's agony sparked a public condemnation against the Colombian administration's essentially non-existent rescue operations. Eyewitness accounts from on-the-ground members, rescue workers and reporters portrayed a woefully insignificant salvage operation that lacked guidance and human resources. Rescue crews, in Sanchez's experience, lacked the necessary resources that could have saved her, including a water pump to clear the floodwaters surrounding her. Omayra Sanchez's feet were stuck by a stone door, while her dead aunt's hands were found beneath the water later. If they'd only found it sooner, rescue teams lacked the construction machinery needed to pull her out. Reporters on the ground confirmed only seeing a few Red Cross members. They searched and rescued personnel scraping through the mud and debris, as well as acquaintances and victims' families. Colombia's 100,000-strong army and 65,000-strong police services were not deployed to help with relief operations on the ground. Colombia's Minister for Defense, General Miguel Vega Uribe, was indeed the most extraordinary individual involved in the mission. Although acknowledging the critiques, Uribe said that the government had done everything possible. In response to concerns that troops should have been guarding the mudflow boundary, the officer explained that if forces had already been dispatched, they would have never been allowed to get through to the areas due to the mud. Frank Fournier photographed Wikimedia Commons, Omayra Sanchez's eerie photograph. Following her death, the photo caused international outrage. People in charge of said rescue mission also refuted claims made by international diplomats that rescue members had turned down proposals of experienced foreign professionals and other forms of international assistance for the operation. Rev Content is the sponsor of this event. Although some friendly nations might dispatch helicopters over there to transfer victims to makeshift critical care centres set up in the small communities untouched by the volcano, or even establish specialised facilities to handle the wounded, it would have just been too late. Some of those who were strong enough to escape the devastating catastrophic event sustained several head, ears, stomach and abdominal conditions. Because of the extent of their wounds, at least 70 victims had to have their limbs amputated. The political backlash over Omayra Sanchez's demise triggered a national debate about photojournalism's conceptual nature. What do you think of this real-life story? Is there a shortcoming from the government? Did the French photographer have a motive aside from helping while doing the documentary? Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. But before leaving, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell to get updated on our future content. With that being said, see you in the next one.